So, Sriram-san, welcome.
Hello.
Welcome to the forum.
Thank you. Namaskar. Good afternoon.
Sir, and warm welcome to you on this forum of IJSC. And what I would like to do is, how is the weather now? You are in Japan, of course.
Yes, I am in Tokyo. It has gotten colder. I think we are just beginning to see the onset of winter. So I think this morning was a minimum of 7 or 8 degrees Celsius. So it's reasonably cold. Yes.
Yeah, but I have visited Tokyo in December. It was lightly snowing, not very much. But it was,
Yeah, it varies from year to year. Some year it snows in December itself. Some years it doesn't snow at all. So we have to see what this year brings.
they are threatening that India will have the coldest winter, at least in North India.
Oh, really? Okay.
So I don't know how we'll have to wait and plan it out. So I think we are ready to start. Is it okay?
Yeah.
So, ladies and gentlemen, very good afternoon to all of you, and who have joined from India as well as from Japan. And welcome to Mijsc at IIM Tatsujin-Speak webinar lecture series. My name is Pratnam. I am the Chief Operating Officer at Mijsc at IIM. Mijsc stands for Mizuho India Japan Study Center, and this is a center of excellence at IIM and has been in existence for the last 3.5 years. Focus of this center is to strengthen India and Japan bonds by promoting academic, industry, and societal linkages. This series or this webinar series, in fact, is one such attempt wherein we are bringing in experts from both the countries to talk about societal, technological, business, and other facets of life, which highlight both the Indian and the Japanese perspective. We started this in September of last year, and this is the 11th in the series. And we have with us today Mr. Venkataraman Sriram. He is the CEO of Cocreate Inc, based in Japan. And he was also earlier the country head of Infosys in Japan. I have great pleasure, in fact, to welcome Sriram-san, and who is also the Vice President of the Indian Commerce and Industry Association, Japan, or ICIJ. He joined Infosys in 1997 and was enlisted by the founders to establish the IT conglomerate in Japan. For over a decade, he held various positions within Infosys, including that of Regional Manager, Asia Pacific, Country Head Japan, Senior Vice President, and also the Regional Manager of the Manufacturing Vertical. In 2018, he established this Cocreate Inc, which provides business consulting to enterprises and startups. Sriram is also an angel investor and an active promoter of entrepreneurship and businesses between these two great countries. So we have much to learn from him about how and how these two great countries can increase their interaction, both on the business side, social side, and the cultural aspect. He is the president also of the chartered member of the Indus Entrepreneurs, or IIM. He played a very critical role. He's a member of the expert group on the FDIs in Japan, and he was, that is foreign direct investment in Japan, and he set up under the cabinet office of the government of Japan this expert group, and he has been helping the government of Japan in doing this. Very quickly, his academic background: he is an alum of IIM Bangalore, and he is a guest faculty of the Global University MBA program, and has featured in many guest lectures at various universities in Japan. Welcome to this forum, sir. I would like to set the context for the discussion for today. The theme for today's discussion is India-Japan business, a practitioner's perspective. So you can't find a better practitioner than Sriram-san, who will share the lessons learned from his experiences of building the Infosys business in Japan when it was non-existent there, and built it up to a sizable, to become a sizable player in the Japanese software market, and of course in the Asia Pacific. He will highlight specific issues that businesses from India need to look at differently while doing business in Japan, and also vice versa. He will also discuss some changes that Japanese corporations will need to make to get the best out of the Indian opportunities, so to speak. So over to you, Sriram sir.
Thank you very much, Saideep Ratnam-san. I am absolutely pleased and honored that IIM Bangalore and the Mizuho India Japan Study Center thought of me to participate in the Tatsujin-Speak series. I am not sure whether I am actually qualified or not, but now that I've accepted this invitation, I will try my best and, you know, convey what I think are some of the points to look at. The format will be, I will use a small presentation just to give a context and some placeholder for discussion. Right. And I'm hoping that we will have a lively interaction after my presentation is done. So let me share my screen and let me know if you can see this properly. Are you able to see the screen?
Yes, now we can see.
Okay. You know, these days, would you want me to do full screen or is this all right?
No, I think full screen will be good.
Okay. Let me swap the settings. So can you confirm that you can see only one slide on the screen?
Yes.
All right.
But Super. This is not the front screen. This is not the first slide.
Oh, which is okay. The first slide is, it's all right. We can start from here.
Yeah.
You know, these days, almost everything that you do in life has got an app or a web front end. And normally this is the kind of the first screen you will see. They'll say accept cookies. So these are my cookies for you. Just some disclaimer. You know, I am not an academic. What I'm going to speak today is not based on some deep research and stats, etc. It is really more based on my experience of doing business in Japan, with Japan, and my interpretation of why things are the way they are. I have used some images I'll probably exaggerate a little bit more to illustrate the point than to criticize, either side, uh, because I do want to make sure that at least a few points are, on the uh, mark, and I look forward to the interaction.
Right.
Okay, now let me see. Yeah, if I look at Indian businessmen who have tried to do business with Japan or who had some experience, these are some of the perspectives. Oh, doing business with Japan is so hard. We really don't know what they are thinking. Sometimes we think, are they even serious about doing some stuff with us? We don't know who decides. They take forever and they are super tough negotiators. Now, this is the Indian business's perspective about the Japanese side. Now, what about the reverse? So, if you look at the Japanese perspective about doing business with India or Indians, they also say something very similar. They say doing business with India is so hard. Indians keep on changing their positions. We really don't know who the key person is. We keep talking to one person till the end, and then suddenly somebody else comes and says that, look, I'm going to change the whole thing. They don't honor time commitment, and Indians are very tough negotiators. So at one end, we think, we don't understand Japan, but the reverse is also true. Japan is also not necessarily very clear about how India works or how Indians think. So I've been, doing business with Japan since 1991. I have lived here since 1997. And what my own conclusion is, I think the definition of value and success as defined by the two sides are quite different. There is some commonality, but what is important is, in my opinion, not understood properly by either side. And therefore, there is always a misalignment of expectations from each other. And because it is not understood properly, the approaches taken are also not necessarily the most suitable for getting to a desired outcome. So let me just take you through a few of these, and we can discuss this during the Q&A. So, definition of value or success. Fortunately or unfortunately, and I don't mean to criticize anything or anybody here, I think a lot of Indian business thinking is perhaps very tilted towards the Anglo-Saxon model of business.
Right.
So our view is, it is better to start first than be complete. Our view is, it's important to keep growing every quarter. It's important to make sure that the stock price keeps going up, all of that. Now, without getting into the merits of whether that's right or wrong, the point is, I think Japan looks at some of these very differently.
Right.
I think for Japan, it is super important to get it right. If I were to use a Japanese word, I think kanseido, that means the degree of completeness, is very important. Whereas for India or the Anglo-Saxon model, it is more important to be first off the block. So what is of importance, is a little different. All of us have been trained in business schools saying that, look, you got to continuously grow, otherwise you'll perish. And our definition of growth, given the context of where India is today and where Indian businesses are, our aspirations and ambitions are, very high. We want to grow really fast and really quickly, and in large numbers. But Japan, where it is right now in its own evolution, is perhaps a little different. While growth is important, don't get me wrong, for the Japanese side also, but it is not growth at all costs, right? They prefer to have a steady business where you can make sure that it is always there with not too many variations. Growth is nice, but they will not do everything or whatever it takes for the growth. There was a time when market share was very important for Japan, and I think even today that mindset is a little strong. Uh, and market share is perhaps more important than profitability, uh, whereas we may think that profitability is crucial uh, as much as growth. And market share, yeah, sure. If growth happens, market share will also happen. But Japan places a lot of premium on the size of the business, the stability of the business, and so on. We want to make sure that from the Indian point of view, the individual success is crucial. All of us, our mental model is oriented towards that, whereas Japan looks at a more holistic team success, etc. So what happens with all of this is, Japan, when it evaluates a partner or an opportunity or a market or a proposal or a candidate, they take great care to evaluate everything in total. It is like looking at the statue on the right, the picture. You enjoy the beauty of the statue by looking at its totality. You don't say, oh, this nose is so nice, and that's why I like the statue. Or this animal figurine is so nice, that's why I like the statue. You look at the whole thing and say that, wow, this is incredible piece of work. So in many ways, Japan looks at the totality and not necessarily, what is in front of them at that point in time. And a lot of that has got to do with the notion that you really are taking a decision for the long term and not the short term. So if I'm choosing a partner, then this partnership has got to live for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 50 years. So when I evaluate, I want to make sure that all the necessary ingredients are there for that partnership to succeed over the longer term. So it's not about this quarter, it is not about this year. And I've actually been asked these questions. So when I came to start the business in Japan for Infosys, one of the first questions they would ask me is, how long are you going to be here? And I could never understand, why are they asking me this question? Because they are used to foreigners in multinationals coming on 3-year contract, 4-year contracts and going away. And then there'll be a new person in. Now, fortunately for me, there was no such thing. And I said, look, no, I don't have such a mandate. My mandate is to get this business going and build it in a substantial, self-sustaining manner. I did not realize it at that time that actually was a very, very positive thing from my prospective customers' point of view. Because they want to make sure that the business is going to be there for a while. And that's one of the reasons why B2B startups have a tough time building businesses in Japan, because the Japanese customer is always worried, if this company is going to get acquired by somebody, will they exit, will the founder leave, will it IPO, and then it'll vanish, etc., etc. So the need for looking at long term is very important for Japan. And in that process, they will look at factor, efficiency. How much material are you taking to produce 1 unit of output? So it is not about price per unit. It is not about, volume discount. All of that is important. But what is more important, if you're a manufacturing company, they will ask you, how many kilos of aluminum goes into making this widget, right? And you would think, why are you asking me that? How does it matter? I am giving you what you want at a certain price. You just let me know if that price works for you or not. But they are not looking at just the price. They are looking at what will happen to this widget from this company over the next few years. Are they fundamentally cost competitive? Are they fundamentally different? Will they be able to sustain today's competitive advantage over the next 10, 15 years? So sometimes when we are trying to sell to the Japanese side, we perhaps don't understand some of those nuances. And then it leads to a lot of frustration, because we are saying, look, what are these guys? Why are they asking me so many questions? They should just tell me in principle, do they want to work with me or not? And, let's get started. But that's not how the Japan side thinks. The other important thing, and, I don't mean to disparage anybody here. I think Japan's model is to spend far more disproportionate time in planning and preparation. Whereas we are probably biased towards early actions and figuring out stuff as we go along. There is a time and a place for that also. But in general, there is a usual disconnect on this dimension.
Right.
Because when we are trying to build businesses here, we think the other side is taking way too long to decide. And we are impatient. And we can drop the ball because we don't understand that part, or we are not preparing equally well on our side when
Right.
real action starts to happen. And I have found this time and again, once the Japanese side decide, then they really want everything yesterday. But they have taken a long time to decide that they will even get started. And then we get into this loop saying, man, you took so long. You can't suddenly say that I want everything tomorrow. That's very unfair. But it's not about fairness or unfairness. It is just about trying to understand what is the mental model that's being used by them, and how does that compare to what we are using as our mental model. And a classic example of this is the recent countrywide vaccination program that Japan has done. So if you look at corona today in Japan, we are less than probably 100 cases a day, new cases countrywide. But there was a time when the entire world was criticizing, saying, why is Japan taking so long? It's way too slow. You should get into action. You should test heavily. You should test anybody and everybody. You should get into whatever vaccine which is available, all of that. But they did it in their manner. And the results are here to see. 78% of the eligible population, I think, is vaccinated, both shots. The number of new cases has gone down substantially. And even a densely populated city like Tokyo, where public transport is crucial, that means everybody is standing next to everybody and breathing, our cases are very, very few, and everybody wears a mask despite all of that.
Right.
Because there has been a lot of thinking that has gone behind how this vaccination has to happen, when it has to happen. Sure, they made a few missteps, but then that's likely to happen because everybody is trying to grapple with something for the first time ever. But when you compare like to like, where people were 24 months before and where they are now, I think they've done a wonderful job. And mind you, in between, they also hosted the Olympics, right? So this is unbelievable degree of detailed preparation that goes into doing something like this. And as people who are impatient for action, we think, yeah, these guys are, getting into analysis paralysis. They never decide, da-di-da-di-da-di-da. Now, I'm not saying that never happens, but I'm saying that you got to understand why does it take so long before you can even make a judgment about, whether it's right or not. Now, what happens in this process is, oops, technology always gives you grief. Yeah, there you go. So one of the elements of this is the focus is not only on the end product, but it is also on the process in which that end product is delivered or made. If you're a manufacturer, obviously there is a defined process from beginning to end, which results in the end product. Japan would look at both, right? They would look at both the process and the end product. Whereas there are other markets which probably say, as long as the product is good, I really don't care how you make it, right? That's your problem. You're a vendor. I don't care how you do it. As long as I get what I want to my spec, to my price points and my lead times, I am fine. But I think Japan is obsessed about process because somebody called Mr. Deming told them that process variation is the key to quality, and they have taken it to heart. And every Japanese process is really about reducing variation. And if you can't control the process, you can't control the output. That's the mental model which is by default. So you can't say that I will somehow put everything under the hood, cover it, nobody will see how I am doing it. And we've all gone through this. We say something on the PowerPoint, but actually what happens is at the first step itself, we rework, it still doesn't work. Then we beat it into shape. It still doesn't work. Then we beat it a little more into shape and make sure that somehow it looks like the end product we originally said it will be. Right? Now, the problem with this is if somebody is asking you details about metrics of in-process metrics, your story will just not stack. Right? And this can be very frustrating because you have not instrumented in-process metrics. So you can't even tell them that this is what happened. And I think given the quality orientation of Japan ever since World War II, I think the in-process metric is perhaps more important than the end product related metric. Because the belief is the end product metric is just a result. It is a natural outcome of the set of processes that have been done before. And therefore, it is super important to control and know what is happening in every process. Right? Because that allows you to do traceability properly in case things go wrong. That allows you to look at productivity in a very different way because now you know where is the real bottleneck. Right? I remember in my earlier job before Infosys, I had the experience of actually working on, looking at a shop floor in India, which was making stuff with Japanese collaboration. And there was an Indian gentleman who actually got trained in Japan about Japanese quality system. And I remember he joined us, and in 6 months, he said, look, our fundamental problem is bad quality. It is not our capacity to manufacture. It is not about, capacity as we understand in production. He says, unless we fix our quality issues, we can never produce in scale. And he was super right because he went back into every single process, looked at every in-process metric, and then said that, look, this is why we are always struggling to deliver in scale. And once we understood what the process bottlenecks are in terms of quality and started removing them, and lo and behold, the factory was like just working like a smoothly oiled machine. So I have seen this at work. And sometimes we may be very tempted to say, yeah, we will do both in parallel. Don't worry. First, let's ship out somehow, right? And meanwhile, we'll fix the process. Believe me, that never happens. That's like saying, I'll start exercising once I fall sick. By then, it's anyway too late, right? Your in-process has to be, look, I exercise every day. I look at whatever is the body vitals. Then I know that I'm going to be fine because my process is fine. And, all of us, including me, we all know how that works out for most of us, right? We do it only when the product starts kind of misbehaving. But by then the process is so deeply set in the wrong direction that it's pretty hard to fix. So that then leads to the question, do you have enough evidence about how you're doing things? And Japan will ask you for a lot of data. Right? And this can be very frustrating for us because we don't understand why they're asking, what is the relevance of all this? I'm giving you what you want, but why are you asking me all the other extra stuff? And Indians particularly, including me, very often we confuse our intention, feeling versus facts. I want to do the right thing by the customer, but that is not enough. I need to have data points and metrics to suggest that my intention is actually backed by real action. And the metric supports that. And very often we get confused that, look, it's okay. Once I have the intention, don't you trust me? I'll do it for you. No, trust is fine. If you're doing it, show me the data, then then the trust issue doesn't even come up in the conversation. Sometimes we don't get it, and this can be very frustrating. And the expectation from Japan is, and the reverse is also true. When Japan wants to do something with India, they will spend so much time researching. the market, the partner, the competitive position, the technologies available, the proposition in each market, the cost structure, the credit rating of the company, profiles of individual key people in the partner organization if they're looking for a partner, because they want to make sure, to go back to my earlier point, that this is a long-term viable stuff. This is not about only today. And all of us who worked in big organizations know this. Taking a decision is hard, but changing it is almost impossible. Right. So you might as well get it right the first time. And getting it right in the first time is actually about spending time on research. And unfortunately, I am sorry to say, we just don't do enough of that as a discipline. What we think is enough, in my opinion, is just not adequate. The other issue where I think we can do much better is in educating the customer, especially if you're coming up with something new. And because I was in the IT business, every day there is something new, right? The pace of change is so fast. I think the more time you spend, the more you invest in educating the customer about what's going on, the better it is in terms of the long-term partnership that you can build. And very often we think it is a wasted investment. There is no direct connectivity between this education and the sale itself. It does not lead me to a revenue increase. So why should I spend money? But I think that's a flawed logic. I think if you are bringing something new, it is good that you invest time in educating the customer about that new. Because remember, that person is also making a decision in an organization. So they have to justify to their own stakeholders. And they will not be able to justify it if they don't understand it. So I think as a seller, it is good for us to make sure that we educate them enough so that they can convince whoever they need to convince internally. The other stereotype usually is, Japan is bottom up, it takes too long. I want to know who the decision maker is, because the Anglo-Saxon model is you get to the right guy, everything will get done. Right? But right. Japan can be a little difficult because both are valid. Bottom up is very important because the lot of real work is done at the bottom and the middle level. And I think you need to look at this as a propose, review, approve layer, if you will. The bottom layer, if it is proposing, or the middle layer, if it is proposing, it has equal responsibility to make sure that the suggestion is a valid one. As much as the executive layer, which approves it, has a responsibility of taking the ownership of that decision finally. So they take their job very seriously, all the layers. So it is important to understand how this thing works. For me, it took a lot of time before I actually figured this out. And I made so many mistakes in the first few years before I got a handle on how this works. So does it mean that you don't cultivate executive relationships? No, that's not true. You also need the top relationships, especially if you're trying to bring in something which is going to disrupt something substantial. Because any disruption cannot happen unless you have executive sponsorship. But the executive will not say, okay, just because he likes it. He is going to push it down to his team and say, research this properly and tell me what this is about. These guys are telling me on the golf course that this is the next best thing after whatever. I don't understand it. Can you guys do the research and come back to me? And then you will start getting questions from the bottom. Right? And then you're saying, no, I have spoken to your boss. I don't want to talk to you. That would be a mistake.
That would be a disaster.
Right? So I think we need to understand how this works. Why are they asking for what they're asking? And it's okay. It's within our rights to ask those questions as to why we need to give this information, what are you going to do with this information, how it will be used, all of that you can do. But I don't think we should get into this ego hassle of, I am not mapped at the right level. I'm already speaking to your top guy. I don't want to talk to you. They'll say, no, you don't talk to me. Then you give me a guy who's at my level. I'll talk to him. But there is always an asymmetry because most of our organizations are fairly lean and we don't work, as multiple people in the same meeting because our model is one guy can do the talking. Why are you taking 5 people? Right? Whereas the Japan model is there are 5 people because all of them are connected to this somehow and they all need to understand what's going on. And they don't mind investing the 5 people's time in that decision. So I think we just need to make sure that we understand what's going on. Importance of partners in long term, like every relationship, you got to really make sure that you put the effort to make it happen. It's about long-term mutual benefit. There are some dogmatic things sometimes we think about saying, look, we don't like capital participation because they will be our customer. Then there is a conflict of interest. They're also part owners. They're also customers, right? But Japan always thinks that capital participation is a way of cementing the relationship, however small it may be, maybe 1%, 2%, 5%, it doesn't matter. So if they're asking for that, I think you need to think about it a little more carefully to see whether, you want to do it or not. Clear role definition between partners is important, especially if you're trying to use a Japanese partner to get into the market here. What will you do? What will they do? So that there is no ambiguity later on as to who is supposed to do what. If you're a vendor trying to find a partner here, then they will ask for exclusivity. You're not sure whether it will work or not work, right? So you don't want to give exclusivity, but they will say, look, I'm going to spend 2 years developing a client for you. I want exclusivity because I need something for the long term. So these are all some of the questions that will come up. And I'm not making a case for exclusivity or non-exclusivity. All I'm saying is you need to think about it very carefully and work through it. But one thing I have learned, no matter who you are, if you are a vendor to somebody, that means if you're a supplier to a company, I think the default position is you are one step below the customer, no matter who you are, right? And I think you got to respect that position because that is the default construct. Saying stuff like we are all equals, etc. I think it may be politically right, but in reality, you're a customer, you're a supplier to a customer, and you defer to the customer. That's not to say that you agree with whatever they say, but you cannot take that position for granted that they are an equal. I have done that once, and I was actually told, Sriram, you're a great friend, but no matter what you do, you cannot become my equal. At a professional level, okay. You are my supplier. Never forget that, right? So I think some of these things are important for us to learn. So just to summarize, I know we are.
I interrupt you.
Yeah. Am I out of time?
Were you lucky to get such a direct feedback?
Yes.
Normally, you would not give
I will tell you why I got it. I got that feedback because I invested a lot in that person, educating him about something new that we were doing with them. And because I invested that time educating that person about all the new stuff, he took the liberty of actually telling me to my face.
Okay.
Otherwise, I don't think it would have happened.
Right.
Okay. Are we okay on time? I have 2 more slides and then we can.
Yes. Yeah, we are okay.
So in summary, I think my submission to the Indian side is the following. I think you should accept that Japan is different and will be different. There is no point in trying to compare it with another English-speaking country or an Anglo-Saxon model and say that, those guys are like that. Why can't these guys be like that? They will not be like that.
Right.
Right? I think acceptance is solving half of the problem, according to me. Right? It's like the olden days. You go to a government office, they ask you to fill a form in quintuplicate. You just do. Fill it up in quintuplicate. It's okay. You don't get frustrated. Why are they asking for 5 copies of the same thing? If the bureaucrat wants 5 copies, you give him 5 copies. It's okay. What is the problem? Right? So same way, I think some of this you have to accept stoically. Right. Second is, and this is very important, I think as a company, you must really decide if you want to do business in Japan. Because it will take time, it will take effort, it will take a long-term commitment. relative returns are likely to be lower unless you have something exceptional, right? And you got to be ready for the long haul. Your people have to be ready for the long haul. And because this place works at a slightly different pace, and I keep saying this, the rate at which you want to grow will always be higher than the rate at which Japan wants to change.
Right.
And therefore, you will never get the same kind of traction that you may get with some other market, which is okay as an early adopter. Because Japan is a very efficient, high speed, fast follower. So if you're bringing something new, your hurdle is actually a little higher, right? But if you're bringing something new which is established elsewhere, I think it can be faster. So you need to really prioritize whether Japan is your first market for something new or you want to do it somewhere else and bring it in. You got to incentivize your people properly because you really want your best people to come and do this because this is not easy. This is hard, right? But the general resource allocation model is I will give resource to the market which is growing fast, which is making money, and I'm going to starve the market which is not growing enough.
Right.
And that's a vicious negative spiral because you're always going to starve the market, and you'll keep saying, no, I'm committed to Japan. Your in-process metric does not suggest that. And there is a disconnect, and eventually the business will fail.
Right.
You got to be ready to make your changes to your quote unquote global standard. Because once you accept the first point that I said that this is different, you got to be able to make sure that, and there is no other area where this is more crucial than the HR area. I have struggled with it because the sales incentives are individual oriented, whereas Japan is team oriented. So how do you design a sales incentive structure for people here who actually come and tell you, no, I don't want high variable pay.
Right.
I'm okay to give up a lot of variable pay for a slight increase in my fixed pay because I want certainty. Whereas all our business school professors, including those at IIM, have said incentive is a good model for sales, right? So then you start struggling with this. How do I design this? But there is a way to design for Japan also. I think we need to be aware of that. Be realistic about the speed, about the growth, about the size. It will take time, but it can be done. Do enough research about the market before you decide to commit here, and do research about your partners, possible partners, before you commit. Determine how you will build a local team. One of the mistakes, I think the most number of mistakes I have made is in hiring. Because the most natural model is I want to hire somebody who looks like me, thinks like me.
Right.
But that may not be the right thing for Japan. Because you want to hire for this market. You don't want to hire somebody because he thinks like you, he can speak like you, he can talk like you. And given the language issues, very often fluency in English can be mistaken for capability. Right? So you got to be very careful. It has to be a very deliberate effort. You got to make sure that you know what you want for the role and you spend enough time to select the right person. And if you're working as a part of a global supply chain where Japan has got a role, then you got to know which part of the value chain is going to be local, which part is going to be global. Right? And that separation has to be done properly. And then you allow the local team to work on the local part of the value chain the way they deem fit. I think one of the best lessons that was taught to be one of my colleagues, who is an American actually, very fluent in Japanese. He said, we have a lot to learn from a company like McDonald's.
Okay.
McDonald's looks the same everywhere, but the menu is not the same in every market. Because the palates are different, tastes are different, what is acceptable religiously is different, what is available is different, local ingredients are different. But the fundamental processes and the common pieces never change. The McDonald's fry tastes the same everywhere.
Right.
right? So I think we just need to learn which part of the recipe are we going to tailor for the local piece, which part of the recipe we think after testing enough that is still valid. And you got to make a deliberate choice. For Japanese colleagues who are trying to do business in India, I think you have to accept that India is different. We are not America, we are not China, we are not Vietnam, we are not Indonesia, we are not Southeast Asia, and definitely we are not Japan. Right? And within India itself, sometimes Indians get confused how to deal with each other. So I'm not surprised that outsiders get confused with dealing with India. The second thing is, don't look at India from a lens from the past. What I mean by that is, oh, India is like Japan was in 1964, which is actually not true. Per capita GDP may look like that, but Indian economic model and structures are very different, right? So we have a disproportionate share of services economy for an economy which is at this stage of evolution. It is almost like we missed industrial revolution, we missed manufacturing, and we've gone straight to, industry 4.0. Right? So there are a lot of quirks about how Indian structure is, which has to be understood. Value definition is very different for us also, as much as it is different for the Japanese. So if you're selling a television to a consumer in India, if you go tell him this television will last for 20 years, that guy's going to say, no, I'm going to upgrade in 5 years. I don't want this television to last for 20 years. And I'm not willing to pay you extra for those 15 years, which I'm not going to use. Because I plan to buy a bigger house and I want a bigger TV at the end of 5 years. So don't ask me to pay extra for those 15 years of life, which is irrelevant to me. Obviously, I'm exaggerating a little bit here, but I think it's important to understand that the value points for India are also very different. Invest in local talent, because no expat can make India happen, because there is so much that's going on the ground that needs, continuous response and a understanding of what's going on. And I'm sure enough case studies have been written how some large consumer product companies have succeeded in India because they have invested in local talent. This is my personal favorite. I think both the countries needs to invest in making sure that young talent have a way of interacting with each other, working together, preferably on the ground. And that allows a much better understanding of each other over a period of time. I think for the Japanese business, to get the best of Indian talent, they need to show a path in global leadership. Because if there is a glass ceiling which says that only the Japanese will become corporate honchos, I think Indians will leave very quickly. Right? Because there is an aspiration that I want to lead a large business, a global business, etc. And I think there is a lot to learn from companies like Unilever or Procter & Gamble or Citibank on this. I think some of the finest global programs have been done by them. I also think that just as we want Indians to educate the market here on things new, I think the reverse is also true. I think Japan has to invest time to explain the why of things, rather than just telling the Indian team, just do it because I'm asking you to do it. Right? And we have a serious cognitive dissonance when it comes to doing stuff that we don't understand. We need to understand the why of it, the rationale of it, the what of it before we start actually doing it. Right? So these are some of my, I'm not trying to be prescriptive here, but some of the learnings I thought may be of use to folks. Just to conclude, I think it's absolutely pointless to compare. You cannot compare idli with sushi. Idli is idli, sushi is sushi. And for people who are not used to the other taste is an acquired taste. You have to invest time and effort to acquire that taste. Or you just say that, look, it's all right, I'm not going to do it. Nobody's stopping us or forcing us to do something that we don't want to do. So let me stop here. I just thought I'll just put some context across, and then hopefully there'll be some Q&A based on what I've just said.
I think you have, I'm sure the audience will agree when I say that you have come and presented some of the, you can call them the root causes for some of the businesses not succeeding, where especially the very first point which you talked about is the definition of value itself. What the Japanese and what the Indians perceive are very, very different. And I think in my previous avatar, I have done a lot of work with in auto industry, and I have seen exactly what you said and see it in action. And I think you have, though you did at the beginning say that you are only a practitioner, I think the difference between a practitioner and an academic is that a practitioner would only, just do it. But you have brought in that, what you call the application of the gray cells. I think you're truly a, no wonder you are such a great leader, because you have distilled from your practicing experience, practitioner's viewpoint, and a lot of great theoretical background are also emerging from what you mentioned. And
you're very great. You're very generous with your words.
No. I mean it, because I also used to struggle quite a bit in as a practitioner. I was the operations head and then the president of a company. But the same issues that you mentioned used to pop up quite often. And I think you have brought in a great perspective to say why those differences in approaches create a relationship problems or relationship issues, starting with how you define what value is, how you define time perspective, how you look at opinion versus fact, and the time and effort spent in educating the customer. I think that's a great point you talked about. So may I take up one, because in the end you did mention about the young people being probably the key point between bringing these two great societies together. So especially you said the exchange of young people in this context, and earlier also you have mentioned that that interaction should improve. So if I may ask you, Sriram, what are the capable measures as per you to bring these two countries together, especially at the younger level, and what you suggest would be for adaptation of each other's ways of thinking, especially the younger generation?
So I think there are multiple possibilities.
Right.
If you're a large Indian company wanting to do business in Japan or already doing business in Japan,
Right.
I think it is worthwhile investing in immersion programs for young people so that they can come spend time here. And, I was very grateful to the leadership of Infosys. They allowed me to do it because I could bring young people from India, make them spend 6 months learning only Japanese. Now, it is expensive, but I think the core team that got built in those programs are still the members who are running the business today. So the long-term payoff of something like that is very high. Second thing is, you can look at internship programs very creatively.
Okay.
And is there a way to do cross-country internship programs, which is very focus specific, etc.
Right.
If you're a smaller business, it may be a little difficult to afford some of these. But I think it is not impossible to look at hiring young Japanese people with interest in India and invest in them. I am absolutely amazed that there are at least 5 or 6 YouTube channels by young Japanese ladies who talk about India.
Wow. Okay.
They live in India. There is one young Japanese gentleman who actually has got an auto rickshaw in Tokyo,
Okay. Right.
right? Because he genuinely loves India. I think it may be good for us to look at how do we capture these people who have a natural affinity for whatever reason. And then is there a way for us to build? If you're an institution like IIM Bangalore, then
Right.
can you tie up with another equally good business school like a Hitotsubashi or a Waseda? And
Right.
can you do 6 months of cross program?
Right.
Right? Can you send your entire batch of 100 students to Japan for 6 months to do a capstone project?
Right. Right.
Right? And vice versa. Now,
Okay.
and I am not undermining the complexity of executing something like this. There is language, there is money, there's all kinds of stuff, but it can be done. I think it can be done. Right? I just hope that more and more companies look at this and do it in scale.
Yes.
And then I think it's possible to do. It's possible to do.
Thank you. If I may take you to a slightly different, because you started off saying that your first experience was in manufacturing, and then you joined Infosys, which is in the services industry. And so you are looking at these manufacturing and services, that is offloading of manufacturing by, say, Japan, and offshoring of services. These two do pose a very different sets of challenges. Could you share what you think are the differences in the challenges between these two sectors? Because we all know how China has become the manufacturing factory of the world. We think we are going to become the services stronghold or services boss. But there are, as you have always advocated in your other talk, these two are very different. Services, getting service contracts or manufacturing contracts, very different. So could you share some of these differences in your mind, what you think companies will learn?
Sure. So I think it all goes back to this point. I think the value chain deconstruction in manufacturing is perhaps easier with very clean boundaries. But services value chain sometimes can be quite hard to segregate geographically.
Right.
And services are also extremely context specific, because that goes back to my first point about what is the value is different.
Right.
Right. So if you go to a bank here,
Right.
there are still tellers.
Okay.
They say they will open the bank at 9, it will open at 9.
Right.
And the person behind the counter is ready to start work at 9, not come into the office at 9.
Right.
So I think some of these are very different. The definition of customer service is very different.
Right.
So services is harder, in my opinion, to do. It's not so simple as exporting a widget.
Right.
I think services requires a far more deliberate effort in understanding the cultural context in which that service is delivered. Number one. Number two, I think it is also harder because a lot of services businesses are perhaps regulated quite substantially. Banking is regulated, insurance is regulated, healthcare is regulated, right? Airlines, well, not very, very regulated, but usually has a country connotation associated with airline. It's not easy to do that. So I think you have to really figure out, if you're a services business, how are you going to make sure that you will offer what is of value to that market? So if it is Japan, what is of value here? Do we have a clean understanding of that? And then is the question of how do you deliver it? Nothing says that it has to be delivered offshore all the time. You can deliver from here if that is what you want to do. But what would be a mistake is to hold on to some principle of a template that worked for most parts of the world and say that that's the only way it can be done. I think that would be a mistake, right? So I'll give you an example from my IT services background. India offshore, obviously the economic model is such that the more you offshore, you can scale faster, better. There is economic value add, which is higher, etc., etc. But the cultural context of delivering services in Japan requires that you need to have a certain minimum footprint in Japan, without which you will not meet the minimum expectation of the service level. So if the rest of the world works with only 20% of the people in the market, Japan may actually need 30, 35%. But you can't hold on to your 20% template and say that, look, that is more sacred than Bhagavad Gita and I'm not going to let it go. Because you will fail in the market. You will not be able to meet the expectation. And services in Japan is by definition very high touch. Right? You can have all the chatbots of the world working on your website for customer service, but every Japanese company will have a toll-free number which is manned 24/7. And you will get to a human being if you want to get to a human being. They will not say that, no, send an email and we will reply when we can. And then they'll also politely say that your call is important to us. Right? But that will not happen here. No matter what business you are in, the customer service is a high touch thing, and you just need to tweak the model for that. Right? You just need to tweak the model for that. But I think the important question is, do you want to go do all of that and still do this market? And you have to be honest about that question and that answer. Because it is very easy to say, oh, Japan is the third largest economy, big market, $5 trillion, we have to be there. But if you don't want to commit to what it takes to be here, I don't think you should be here. Because there are other rational, as to why you should not allocate resource to this market and go somewhere else. I mean, nobody's stopping. Right? Nobody's forcing anybody to come here as well. So, for example, you can't come and say, no, rest of the world at least speak some English. These guys don't speak English. Well, they don't speak English. That's a given. So, I think you have to just come in with your eyes and ears open. That's my message. But it is hard. Services is very hard. And, there is data, right? There is no global major services firm which is a leader in Japan. There are exceptions, but very, very few. The reverse is also true. There is no global major services company of Japanese origin which is a leader in the rest of the world. And that says something, right? There must be a reason. Because these are very culturally, context heavy, high touch, etc., etc.
I think you have given a great insight to the value chain itself, whether it can be deconstructed easily, and then the context specific. Then you brought in the point about the regulated industry, and especially in Japan, but in most countries, and also being a very high touch or human contact oriented, and therefore it is a very difficult area to penetrate. Very good. Thank you. Appreciate it. There are a spate of questions from the audience, but before we take on the audience questions, I had two questions for you to just explore slightly different aspects. One question which bothers many people is what is actually the difference in the innovation culture between these two countries? You have worked in both the countries and spent many years. So how do you see as a difference in how these two people approach innovation?
Wow. So I really don't know if I'm qualified to answer, but let me take a shot at it.
Right.
You know, I think the general perception is Japan is not innovative. I think that's absolute rubbish.
Okay.
It is just that I think they do it very quietly, very differently. Japan continues to spend, if I'm not wrong, 2.5 to 3% of GDP on R&D. And they are doing some fantastic work, fundamental work in multiple disciplines, be it materials, be it medical, be it biotech, be it, quantum computing, be it all of that. So there is a lot of, let me call, seeds available for innovation because of the research. And I was very fascinated by the fact that despite going through a very hard 20, 30 years of business after the bubble burst, I don't think any large major Japanese company has actually reduced R&D expense. They would have cut everywhere else. Because it goes back to my earlier point, what is our long-term sustainable competitive advantage? And that's research. And that's not changed in Japan. Even today, companies work on some fascinating stuff. Because we don't hear about it in English media, because they don't make a noise like Silicon Valley makes, because they don't talk about pre-IPO, unicorn, sunicorn, and all that stuff, we assume that nothing is happening. That is totally wrong. The other piece is, and this is something I don't personally like about the Japanese innovation, lot of it is, let us first innovate for Japan before thinking about going outside. And therefore, lot of it is, within Japan and doesn't go out. So most of the world is insulated from the happening because, it just happens here and it dies here and nobody is any wiser. And I keep telling them, look, why don't you do outside in for a change? Right? And that is why I think this young people exchange is super crucial. So I did an experiment with one of the companies that I advised. I told the CEO, look, you want to change your business model, you want to build new stuff, etc. Let's do an experiment. Let us send young people to India. Let them come up with a business plan while sitting in India. And I'll tell you, it had a good unintended consequence.
I see.
That the young people actually realized that there is a world outside Japan.
Okay.
And the world outside Japan is behaving totally differently. Right? And this is in Bangalore, where a 19-year-old kid is sitting next to them and telling me that I want to change the world. And that's why I'm doing a startup.
Okay.
Right? And they're saying, look, how can a 19-year-old even say stuff like this?
Okay.
So then they said, no. After a while, they realized where that energy is coming from. Because they got nothing to lose. That 19-year-old has nothing to lose in India. So he's going to give it all he has got or she has got. So when they came back with a completely different mindset about how to look at new businesses. So I think there is a lot of innovation that's happening here, but it is all very, very Japan-centric.
Right. Okay. Very good point.
So I'll give you a classic example, and I still haven't figured it out myself.
Okay.
So Japan has got Twitter, Japan has got Facebook, Japan has got LinkedIn.
Right.
Rest of the world uses LinkedIn for business connections.
Right.
Japan hates LinkedIn because they think it is very poorly designed.
Okay.
Okay, now I'm taking names here. I know this is getting recorded, but I'm giving a general perception.
Right.
Japan uses Facebook for business to business connections. Now, in some sense, it's a very Japanese way of innovating around an existing platform,
Okay.
right? So I
Right.
think there is a lot of stuff that's happening. For example, on digital currency, crypto coin, there's a lot of work that Japan is doing. But in areas like this, the regulator also has to change fast enough to allow the innovation to flourish.
You have to keep
And
up
that's
with
the headache for Japan,
it.
is how much risk do you allow to become something mainstream? Because remember, it is a high-touch society. Things can't break. One ATM fails, it's on the Nikkei newspaper the next day. Whereas in India, one ATM fails, you say, go to the next corner, man, there is something else. Why are you wasting time? Why are you complaining about this one ATM not working? But given Japan's need for high quality, predictability, which is a proxy for quality, you cannot allow the device to fail. So the regulatory sandbox has to make sure that it really works. They can't allow stuff to break. And that can delay the process or slow down the process, but that's not to say that innovation is not happening. Absolutely, innovation is happening.
Thank you. I think that was a very insightful answer. If you can, I will take you to the last question from my side, and because I wanted to explore this aspect and look at your viewpoint, because as you know, I am from IIM. So I and many of my colleagues would like to understand about how to build innovation culture in students, because especially innovation and entrepreneurship, in a way, they are out of links. Innovation alone will not work, entrepreneurship alone will not work. But if you have the ability to build these two together, then could be a great success formula. But we are all struggling with not just the IIMs, but the technical institutes as well. So, how would you advise? Advise may be the wrong, word, but what would be your take on how the educators can inculcate innovation and entrepreneurship skills in young minds of innovation?
So again, you're asking me more difficult question than my professors asked me when I was at business school. I am a very strong believer that India does not lack in entrepreneurship. I think India has got some absolutely finest entrepreneurs, including the lady who is selling vegetables in the street corner. Right. Make no mistake, there's a lot to learn from those people.
Right.
I think what India needs to perhaps look at is, how do I create a safe environment for experimentation to happen rapidly?
Yeah.
And I think two requirements for that are A, can I create a market to actually test this quickly? Can IIM become a market to test innovation and entrepreneurship? So I do not know how many students are there. Let's assume that there are 800 students in a year. Now that's an 800 people market.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Is there a way for us to test things very quickly in a controlled market, if you will? Mm-hmm. I don't think there is sufficient structure around something like this. Because giving money is not going to solve all the problems, because finally it has to hit the market and see the viability. how do we provide a mechanism to do that is going to be super important. Number two is, maybe in a business school, people understand some concepts about business, but that may or may not be true for, say, engineering schools.
Right.
When I was in engineering school, I did not even know what an invoice was.
Right.
Right. So I think it may be useful to look at, can I give a business flavor to some of the technical stuff that's happening? In fact, there's a very interesting startup that I got to know in Bangalore, which is actually got a technology platform to allow engineering students in third, fourth year to build products in lieu of a credit in engineering.
Wow. Okay.
Right? And you go through series of MVPs, if you will. But everything is done on the technical platform, and then external mentors can look at it, etc., etc. I think we'll have to create something scalable like that. I don't know if it answers your question, but I'm thinking on the fly here.
Your example was spot on. I think that's an excellent, probably a way one can simulate it. Now, there are many questions. I will select one, a few from there. A guy has asked you again, another Mubarak Ali. He has asked a very difficult question. Amongst all your experiences in Japan, what would you consider as the biggest learning of your life, which has remained with you?
I don't know, it's very difficult to choose one or the other. But I think the last slide that I showed has a very fundamental meaning to me. Because the other way to look at the slide and interpret is, you can learn from everywhere.
I see. Okay.
And I think the real thing is, can I learn from a completely different context?
Yeah.
And add it to what I already have, and create something which is very different. Right? When I look at my 25 years of life here, I think consciously, unconsciously, perhaps I have got multiple things. And I think it has enriched me in more ways than one. I only wish that if there is a way to kind of scale it up so that everybody gets this opportunity that I got, I think that would be awesome. There's a way to do it. I don't know if it answers Mubarak Ali's question. Yeah, but I don't think we should look at difference as a challenge. I think we should look at differences as a way to inspire us and do something with that difference. Like they say, innovation always happens at the boundary. It never happens at the center. Because it is only at the boundary that you crash with other things.
Right.
And it is that interaction that creates new ideas.
Right.
So I think I looked at, my learning was, look at every single thing as a difference and see what can I pick up from there. And of course, there's a lot to learn from how the Japanese have succeeded. I always tell people, never forget two things.
Yeah.
This country had nothing in 1945 at the end of the Second World War.
Right.
They have built everything back. Not only have they built everything back, they have built something that everybody is envious of. No question about it. Number one. Number two, no matter what the criticism is, the data is the largest number of companies that have survived for more than 100 years exist in Japan. And that's the proof. that businesses have been here for such a long time. They must be doing something right. Otherwise, they can't survive.
Exactly.
So I think it is only right that we try and understand and learn from it.
One last question. This is Hindu Vikas. I mean, he's talking about the startups, and his question is, what would be your advice to Indian startup companies? What path they should follow to get some share in the of the Japanese market pie, and what could be the approach, both the strategy and the approach? It's a broad question, but you may select any aspect and highlight that.
So I think it depends on the type of startup, but that will be a very consulting-ish answer anybody can give. So let's look at what can the startup gain from a relationship with Japan. A startup can get capital from Japan, not easy, but if you're persistent enough and if you work towards it, it is possible to get capital. There is, at least I know there are 11 or 12 Japanese VCs who have funds operating in India, right?
Right.
So capital is definitely an option. Market, I think, is a tougher challenge. And let me divide it into two parts for simplicity. If you're a B2C, then you got to make sure that you have spent enough time to understand what the C part for Japan is.
Right.
And you have the wherewithal to play that game.
Right.
If you have been funded like by a Sequoia or a Tiger, billions of dollars, and you've already established elsewhere, then you say, just like Paytm has done, Paytm has got a service called PayPay here,
Right.
but they did not come on day one. They came much later when they were ready with muscle to play the game.
Right.
I think so. Timing is an important question.
Okay.
If you're a B2B, then it is a relatively easier problem because your customer set is a targeted set and a finite set. But you have to still play the long game. It's not going to happen in one day.
Right.
Because of the reason that I told you earlier, they are very worried. Are you going to be there as a company or are you going to get bought out? As a founder, you'll make your money and leave. Then what happens to the company? Right? They don't want to be stuck with something that they cannot, deal with because there is nobody to take care of it later. But is there a hunger in Japan to incorporate new innovations in their business products? Absolutely. Every Japanese company wants to look at innovation. That's why every large Japanese company will have what they call as an antenna set up in the Silicon Valley. Not because they are doing business in Silicon Valley, but they want to know what's going on. And they do invest in startup, which makes sense to them. But it is a long game. You have to be ready for that. And you have to see whether it fits within your strategic priorities or not. And if it does not, you should not do it. I always tell every startup that calls me and saying, hey, we want some business in Japan, can you help us? My first advice is don't do it.
Okay. Right.
They say, why? I say, you're not ready for it.
Right.
Right? Because the problem is you cannot be sitting so far away and expect that the customer will be okay with it. He will not be okay with it. Remember, it is high context, high touch. So they want to see people right here. And you say, no, I have one old, retired guy who used to be in Infosys, who's trying to help me in Infosys in Japan, and he's the only guy on the ground. They'll say, no, I don't want it.
Okay.
Because I really want somebody on the ground here. But I do know that companies who have done well as startups, because they are very focused on what the target segment is and what the value addition is. So there is a company that's incubated out of Indian Institute of Science.
Right.
And it's a very niche area. They have a software product for understanding, I think, thermal and EMI interference during a PCB design or something like that.
Right.
Very esoteric stuff. But it fits in a certain segment, which is very clear. And I know they have done business in Japan. So it really depends. Do we have specificity where there is a very clearly defined problem which you're able to solve with your stuff very differently and provide a value which is order of magnitude different? Oh, absolutely. Japan loves stuff like that. But are you a generic company? And I use generic not in a pejorative way, but I am a EC analytics company, e-commerce analytics. A lot of companies like that. There's nothing unique about what somebody is doing. But I have an algorithm which lets me know, how to make my Google ads better, which nobody else has got. Yeah, maybe there is a story. I don't know. Yeah. The more specific it is, I think the easier it is to address whether you should do stuff in Japan or not.
You touched upon again the value part exactly, and if they see specific value to the business that or the model that is being offered, I think they will go for it. That's what you're saying. Thank you.
Absolutely.
And I think it has been a very, very interesting. We didn't even realize that it's almost 90 minutes since we started. Thank you for your time, and it has been a great learning experience. You say you call yourself practitioner, but I think you're a great thinking practitioner, which is a rare combo. And appreciate for your great input. And I'm sure that we will expect long-term interactions with you at this Mijsc at IIM. So, thank you, sir.
No, you're very kind. You're very generous. I am very grateful for this opportunity, and I thank all the people here listed on the slide who worked behind the scenes, including you, Soumya, Gopika, Divya, Babu. I hope I've not missed anybody. And I want to thank all the participants. My mail ID is here. Please feel free to write to me. If you want to continue the dialogue, I'm happy to help in whatever way I can. Thank you once again for the opportunity. Thank you so much.